So this is the Sausage Sports Club Weekly Update. I do this every week to talk about what I worked on that week in the game and how I'm feeling about it. Um, I do this for 4 reasons. One, I think it's a useful resource for new students or new people getting into independent game development to see what it's like to make a game, what kind of stuff you work on, how you solve problems, that kind of stuff. Two, it's a good marketing thing to just have new content coming out every week and have like a drip feed of new information about the game. So that's kind of what this is. Three is a more selfish reason of keeping a record of my development process on this game. I think it'll be cool in 5 or 10 years to look back on this game and other games I make and see what my process was like at the time. And then the fourth reason is something I learned like while doing this stream is sometimes people will come join the chat, know how to do something better than me, and then tell me how to do it, and then my workflow gets better. So that's super cool. We can just get right into it. This week, I mostly spent time fixing bugs and doing like kind of like workflow improvement stuff, which some of that was just like things were bothering me and I wanted to fix them, and it was more, it's less scary to work on that kind of stuff than to like do the things that finish the game sometimes. So that's why I worked on some of that stuff. I have a big list of bugs and little fixes that I'm going to run through. As I was preparing for this, I kind of ran out of time pre-stream, so I'm going to like read through this list, and then there's probably another list at least as big as this in my version control that I'm going to go back to. I think this is probably going to take a while if I dive into each issue a lot, so I'm going to try to keep each one brief. I'll come back to questions towards the end probably if there are any. Yeah, so first I'll do like, I'll show you just like generally what has been updated since last week. I think last week I was working on this kind of section here, fleshing it out, making it look better, and since then I think I need to generate, yeah, let me bake reflection probes. The map looks a little weird. I just baked lighting a second ago with like really low settings just so it would look not like total crap for the stream. Anyway, last week I was working on the like entrance from the outside world into the Hollywood section. You're never going to be able to exit like the Sausage Sports Club world, but part of making it feel like a movie set is that there's camera equipment and an entrance, so I wanted to kind of have this like production lot looking area where people might hang out as they're getting ready to film stuff or whatever. So there's like director chairs and camera equipment and like hot dog carts, you can get lunch. So this is what I was working on last week. I don't remember if I had actually been working on this last week or not on stream, but now there's actually like an entrance to the Hollywood arena over here, and I'm still going to do work on it, of course, but this is supposed to be a poster of like what the map you're going to go into, like the arena you're going to go into there. Obviously that needs to be improved. We've got this nice like brick texture along the Hollywood production lot buildings now, along the bottom part of them. I added some occlusion to the brick here, so it's a little bit darker overall, and it kind of makes the normal map that's making the surface look a little rough like stand out more. So that's some of the environment stuff. There's also a lot of invisible colliders that you can't see that I spent time on this week, and I think I'll get to that in my like run through of bugs and stuff, so I'll come back to that. So let's just go through the fixes. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned last week on stream, we were having issues making builds on Switch. There was some big issue with the dev tools, and there was like a forum post where a bunch of people were complaining about it, and so their fix for that was like a hot fix where they basically deleted the version that had the problem and put up a new version in its place. so that you couldn't download the wrong version and have this issue. And that's cool, except on my machine, I had run into that issue, looked at the forums, figured out a solution, done the solution, and it ran on my machine. And then getting Bryce, who's doing QA, to be able to run the game and make builds on their machine, I needed them to download that SDK version, do the same fix as me, but without either of us knowing, they had done that hotfix, and then there was a different SDK, so we were on different versions. And so we spent a bunch of time debugging that, trying to get to the right version and stuff. So I had to upgrade Unity versions again. Luckily this time it was no big deal. There wasn't that many big differences, and I think there was even like a performance boost from that update. So cool. That's all I'll say about that. I'm gonna move this off screen so I can like move around in the editor. At some point last week, I broke the splash triggers that cause a water splash to come up when players jump, into water. As I mentioned last week, I also learned about convex trigger collision, where basically instead of defining a collision shape with a bunch of small primitive shapes, you can use a more complex mesh and then mark it convex, and that makes it internally in the physics engine physics engine breaks it down into little pieces that are similar to primitives. It's like triangles basically, but makes it much faster than a normal mesh collider. And so I realized this worked. You could do this with triggers, and you wouldn't run into the problem of, if you have, let's say, if we want to define a zone with spheres to make up this approximate shape of a zone, if you were using triggers for this, anytime a collider enters, let's say there's a collider coming this way, it enters this one as a trigger, keeps going, enters this one as a trigger, enters that one as a trigger. Each time it enters one of these spheres, that's a callback of on trigger enter, and that means you're getting 3 callbacks. And as well, when you're exiting each of these, that's not an exit callback, and that's not really what you want in a lot of cases. Like if I'm trying to maintain a list of all the objects that are within my collider that I've defined, or in my zone that I'm trying to define with these colliders, it becomes a lot more complex to keep track of which ones are within any of these than it is with just like one convex shape. Where's my water? Yeah, so with this, instead of defining a bunch of primitive shapes, I just define, the approximate shape that I want, and then I don't need to worry about that, like multiple trigger enters and exits. It's just like if anything enters this or exits this, it's exactly the callback I expect. I don't have to do any extra management on top of it. It's a little bit more expensive than primitives, but not, in the form of this game, where in the entire world I only have maybe like 50 to 100 dynamic objects at once. It's not that crazy to be checking against this trigger versus primitives, let's say. So anyway, in last week's stream and preceding that, I had been doing a lot of work on the overworld, changing a lot of how it was shaped, like and the mesh layout of stuff. And at some point I broke the water trigger, so you couldn't do splashes, so I had to set up these triggers again. And the only thing you need to know to understand how that works is there's this trigger. When something dynamic enters it, if they're coming from above, I play a certain VFX that's like something falling into water, and if they're exiting the trigger, then I play a different VFX that's something coming out of water. And that's just a component with just an on trigger, enter, and exit on it. And I check this cooldown, like I have a timer that's like, if enough time has passed since the last splash, we're allowed to do a new splash, and that's it. So that's one. A similar issue, when I had redone the layout of the overworld, some of my colliders that I had set up for specifically, whoops, specifically for the docks. And let's look at the docks. Here we go. That one? No. The docks. I guess I can use this one. Anyway, so I don't have to use such a complex collider for the docks, which have kind of a weird shape. I manually set up a bunch of boxes and capsules for the pillars to be used as like simple collision for the player to go against. And note that this is different from the trigger problem. Like, we don't need to worry about multiple enter and exit calls, like confusing our state, because it's literally just physics resolution. So using a bunch of simple primitives for this is like the right way to do it. Whereas with the trigger thing, it's not really the right way to do it, or it's not the easiest to understand way to do it. So anyway, when I was redoing the layout of the overworld, something went wrong when Unity re-imported the overworld, and all of these colliders were offset to the like origin of the world, and I had to replace those and the ones for the docks down here. Fix that. On the next issue, last week on stream, I think I adjusted these chairs so that they were using one material instead of a material for the wood and a material for the red, the like fabric red that's on a director's chair like this. And that was cool. Like, it saves me a draw call, and the chairs actually look better than they did before as well. But when I did that, it broke a bunch of scenes in the game where director's chairs are used, and I basically just had to rebake those scenes with the new light map, like with the new light map UVs that Unity generated when I imported these. So that was the thing I had to do. Removes deprecated menu items and tools. So in my menu up top, there's a bunch of like custom stuff I use to do different things in the game. Let's see what an example of this is. So in the Sausage Soccer screenshot, I have these tools that run through every character in the game and like load them into the scene, take a screenshot, and then save that screenshot to a specific file or to a specific folder, so that I can then use those as character portraits or as icons in the hat select menu, or I guess the hat one is for hats, hat icons, and the character one is for character icons. That's great. Back when I was doing that, I was using a different workflow for loading characters into the game and hats into the game. So those are all in the resources folder. So in that editor tool, I could easily use resources load all to get the array of all those characters or all those hats. And since then, to optimize load time in the game, I stopped using resources load for anything. And so now that menu tool is broken, and I had to decide to either fix it or just be like, I guess I'm not going to use this anymore. And that's an example of where I was like, I might need to use these again. Like, if for some reason I want to redo the character select screen, or if maybe not at all promising this, but maybe I would want to add characters again after launch or something, I still want to have that tool. So I decided to maintain that and like fix this editor tool to use a different way of loading from the prefabs folder instead of the the resources folder, which I'm not using anymore. That's a thing. Welcome, Light Arrow Mari. Okay, another issue, and this one keeps coming back to bite me, and I feel like I just need to bite the bullet and like go back over the spikes. All the spikes in the game, or I should say, in each arena there are spikes that are used in sumo mode, which is like the kind of deathmatch-ish mode in the game. Why do these look so fucked up? Man, I'm gonna have to bake light maps in this again. I don't want to worry about that right now, I guess. Oh no, I just need to bake reflection probes in this scene. No? Well, that's weird. I'll have to come back to this. Or was that change an editor only one? Mari, now I keep all of the prefabs that I need to load at runtime referenced on my like managers in my manager scene. So like an example of that is the player manager now has a direct like reference to all of my character prefabs. So I don't have to load them. It's just when I load that scene, I'm loading all of the characters and I can just use them there. And that it's kind of weird because I'm like now I'm loading all of those with the scene instead of only loading them when they're necessary. But I found that on Switch that was drastically improving my load time, not only at the start of the game but also like at the start of arenas when I would need to spawn a player and I'd need to, well, maybe not then actually, because what I would do to load the characters at the start of the game was use resources load all to get all of them, put them into a dictionary so that I could just get that prefab whenever I needed instead of loading them again. Anyway, that's the idea. Get back to the spike thing. Each arena in the game has these spikes. They're used for sumo, whatever. But at some point earlier in development, I was using like kind of significantly different lighting for each of the scenes, and the spikes specifically didn't look the same in every scene, so I decided, oh, I should just make a different material for each scene's spikes. And that's kind of a bad idea if I change lighting, because then the spikes are tied to the scene rather than just being like the same material in like an abstract sense of like, you know, the same brightness, the same racks, the same to light. If those look different between scenes, it's going to be noticeable, and you know that's not what you want. So I did basically as a result of that, I had to go back over every scene and like tweak the spikes again based on some lighting changes I made. And I have a little note with my thing here. I should probably switch these back to all using the same material, because it doesn't really make sense to have them on different ones. This was a fun one. This next one, there was a bug where when you as the player, go back to overworld, when you would dash, if you were just landing after a jump and you hit the dash button, there was a rare bug. I would say it would happen maybe like 5% of the time, where if you try to dash, I think on the same frame as jump or as landing a jump, you would dash in the wrong direction. And this had been really annoying to me for maybe like a week and a half or something before I actually looked into what it was. But it turns out that I made an optimization to getting the player's left stick input vector in how do I explain this? There's a class that maintains player input, and anywhere that an actor in the game is moved around. So anything that controls physics of an actor, whether that's a player or like a crab or a trash bot or whatever, they all can grab from the input and use the input as like their director. And there's a left stick and a right stick, and in this optimization thing I'm talking about, I basically decided, you know, every frame the input only changes at the start of the frame, and then for the rest of the frame it's going to be the same. And whoop. So if I get it once and I do the calculation of, you know, getting this input vector and transforming it into camera space, and if the player is like confused, which isn't really a state I use anymore, but if they were confused, their input would be flipped, so your right would be your left. We could apply that, and if the player, what else is there in there? Get the left stick. Yeah, we get camera space. Yeah, we normalize the input so that if you're aiming like up and right at the same time, you're not getting a higher magnitude. So your vector's not higher magnitude. Basically, this stuff right here, get input control, I believe. I guess not. Yeah, basically there's a little bit of calculation here that if we checked like, has the frame number changed since the last time we got to this? If it has, then we need to do this again, but if it hasn't, then we can just use the same as last frame. I basically made that optimization not realizing that the camera could change position in a fixed update, and then that would be a different, that wouldn't be a different frame, but you still would want to get a new input, if that makes sense. Because fixed update can happen multiple times per frame, and the camera's movement happens in fixed update, which means that the camera can move multiple times per frame, which should change your input here. And the players also are moved in fixed update. Sure thing, Lego Mori. Oh, I shook my window away. Let me get everything back here real quick. Okay. So that was an annoying bug, and I felt a little dumb, because when I started thinking about that optimization, I was like, this probably isn't gonna save me much frame time, but you know, any optimization is anything I can get is good now when I'm like trying to optimize anywhere in the game I can to get frames back. So, but I ended up just reverting it, and looking back at it, it's not that big of a savings. Like I'm like not even this one, I'm like doing some math, but I don't know, it's probably fine. I fixed that bug. There was a few bugs associated with the mask thing I talked about 2 weeks ago on stream. And so this is the effect where when you go into a building, we fade in an image effect that turns everything that's not masked black, and then everything that is masked is just like you can see it. So the inside of the building we want to mask, and the outside we don't. That turns everything black. There's a few bugs with just like the state control of that on the camera. I wasn't properly handling, like if I'm in a building and I go back to the menu, like make sure that's turned off, or if I'm in that building and I, you know, fly the camera out and land the player somewhere, that didn't work in every case. Or if I'm in the building and another player walks up to the gym with somehow they're off screen, but whatever, and goes to the gym, then you know it wouldn't fade out from black, and then you get to the gym and the whole screen would be black except for the players. So I had to handle that. A bug I discovered in the process of fixing that indoor mask issue is the camera in some cases would how do I explain this? When I load into a scene, the camera snaps to be where the camera zone that you're in expects the camera to be, or wants the camera to be. I'm sure I've talked about this before, but if my camera's main focus, which in the case of the overworld is player one, or yeah, player one, wherever player one is, that decides where the focus is, which is this green dot, and then the green dot is simulating that, and wherever they are, wherever that camera target is, we check if we're in a camera zone, which is these red boxes all over the place. The camera zone has settings on it that define where the camera is supposed to be if our our focus is in that zone. And when we load into a new level, we snap the camera target to where the zone that our camera focus is in. We snap the camera to where that zone is telling us we want to be. But in the case of the overworld, and I'll just like shrink this zone to illustrate my point. If I went into the hat shop from the overworld here, so I walk up to this, go into the overworld, when that happens, the overworlds, or I guess the players, save their position in the overworld the last time when they were there. So when we come back from the hat shop, the players will be where they were, instead of like me having to arrange some like set positions for the players to come back to around every level change thing, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to have to define spots for players to spawn for every different place they can go that's not in this level. Maury, I'll come back to your question in a second. Thanks, Hangle Blacks. Oh, that's a racist thing. Maybe don't be in my chat. I get that's fucked. That guy just has that name so that streamers will say it when they see the name pop up. Good thing I pronounced it wrong. Anyway. Man, that made me really mad. Fuck that guy. So anyway, when you teleport back, your players will go to where they were before entering the zone, and if the position they were in before they were in the overworld, or before they left the overworld, it's saved when you go off to another level. So when you come back to the overworld, we snap you back to that position. If that position you snap back to, if you're player one and you're the camera's focus, happens to be outside of any camera zone, when we tried to snap the camera back to that focus, we didn't have a camera zone just to like base our position on, so we were kind of screwed. So I had to handle that situation, which I think is just like, if we don't have a camera zone, don't do the snapping, or use like the default snapping or something. I don't remember. Okay, let me answer this question. So Mari, you're rendering the outside and inside on two different textures and blending. No, so let me come back over here. So I'm rendering the whole screen just regularly, but there's certain objects in the scene that are called masks. So for this one, this is the shape of it, and I can change the material for a second just so you can see what it is. Yeah, so I have this mask object, and it's literally just like the interior side of this, so you can't see the faces from the outside. You can only see them ones on the inside. So here, if I go in here and let me make it standard. Again, standard. So you can see it kind of just shows me like just the inside part that I would want to see. And the shader on this object, you can't normally you can't see it in the main render. All it's doing is writing into what's called the stencil buffer. It's writing, you know, an arbitrary value. I think it's 50 in this case. And the stencil buffer is, think of the entire screen's worth of pixels, and then for each pixel there's a number. And usually let's say it's 0, I don't know what it is, but in this case it's 50. So for whatever camera angle we're rendering, if it's this one, any pixel that's occupied by this mesh I'm showing you, instead of being a 0, there's a 50. Then when we render the whole screen, we render it as usual. Then in our image effect, we take the screen as it's been rendered and go over it again and say, if this pixel's stencil value is 50, draw it as usual, otherwise draw it as black. That's the idea of this mask. So there's no like multiple textures. It's just like, just draw the screen as usual and then do another pass across the screen to either keep what's there or put black on it. So that's how that works. What's next? Clears camera targets when switching scenes. This is kind of a weird one, because if I do a good job programming the game, then I won't ever need this. Ideally, anything that is registered with the camera will deregister itself with the camera when it's destroyed or disabled or whatever. And for players, for example, when you spawn them into a scene, they register with the camera. When they die or when you leave the scene, they get destroyed and they deregister themselves with the camera, which is great. But in some weirder cases they don't necessarily do that. Like in the case of a dialogue, I like force an NPC to be a camera target just for the dialogue, and if you were to quit to the main menu in the middle of that, I may or may not handle that. Like in some of these special cases, I may not handle deregistering as a camera target. And so there's an off chance, and this happened rarely in the game, where you would do something, the camera, in some special case, there would be a camera target, a thing for the camera to focus on, added to the camera's list of focus targets, and then you would do some big state change, like leaving the scene or quitting the game or whatever, and the camera in that new scene, the camera manager is a singleton. It's the same camera. It would, the next frame after you loaded that scene, it would go through its list of camera focuses, get to a null ref because you loaded to a new scene, don't have the NPC anymore, and hit an error. And rather than doing a null check there, which is expensive on my target platform, instead I say, I don't want to get into game state logic, but when I'm leaving the overworld, I say, clear the camera. We know we don't want anything in this scene to be maintained as a camera target where we're going, so we just clear it. So that's a thing. Yeah, Maury, I feel like the stencil buffer is, at least as far as I've seen in Unity, is a really useful tool for interesting image effects. Like you could do selective image effects on certain objects, and I haven't really seen a lot of people doing that. And I think it's just not a hard topic to understand, but it's like not very well explained in a lot of the documentation, and there's not a lot of like good blog posts explaining what it is and how it's used. And especially in image effects, I first stumbled upon this idea of using a stencil buffer to selectively do a thing in an image effect years ago, and I found a couple blog posts on it, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I think it ended up being that those blog posts are now out of date with upgrades to Unity, but it took me several years of just like fiddling around with graphics programming in Unity to actually figure out how to do it. Yeah. Maybe I'll put an example together in a separate project and put that on GitHub, just because it's like there's two shaders and then the image effect, and that's all you need to do it. So that would be easy to understand. So that's the camera target bug. Next one, switches blocker colliders to be dense pro builder walls. Oh, okay, I know what that is. Let's get rid of these camera zones. So Bryce, the QA champ, Sausage Sports Club QA champion, kept logging bugs where they could get through to a biome even when it was locked in the progression of the game, and that was because the collision blocking players from getting to a biome was just like on these fence objects. It was a box collider that was scaled up real big, scaled to the side like kind of big, so that's like pretty good. But if you tilt this at all, and if you do the same one on this and you tilt that, there's eventually going to be a gap in these where you can go over it. Also, if you tilt this one a little bit back like that, the player can kind of cheat their way up this wall. I'm not going to show an example because it's not super important, but basically there's a way to go up a wall very slowly but fast enough and stable enough that you could get over the top of that collider, or get up high enough to get to the gap to get over it. Bryce kept logging these bugs, and eventually I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm just gonna do it like the really overbearing way. Why can't I see this? Oh, it's on the collision layer. Boom. Okay. Yeah, so eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna make this a big pro builder big wall. No way to get through that. Made sure it overlapped with the kind of backup collision stuff like this one. I made sure it was like super jugging into that, and that all the walls are flat so you can't go up them. There's also a ceiling, so even if you could go up somehow, you can't get over it. And this wasn't that much work, but it's, you know, it's one of those things to make the game feel more stable and less breakable. Yeah, speedrun strats. So that's a thing. Another fix. At some point in the last month, I discovered the use of drop mesh. I think that's what they're called, drop mesh links in a nav mesh. When you basically when you generate a nav mesh, you end up with things like this where there's a flat surface and another flat surface beneath it that, like, logically an AI would know that, like, I can walk off this ledge and fall down this thing, and depending on how you handle your AI logic, like if you're using a nav mesh agent, then it's like very strict, sticks to the thing. The only way it would move from one point, from one nav mesh island to another, is if you have what's called a nav mesh link, and you can, if you set the settings right, you can generate nav mesh links that automatically calculate like drop offs from a high point to a low point. And so for some reason I didn't have these on before, and so my AI agents would always go around, like in this case, spikes. Let's turn those off. Yeah, so in this case, my nav. What the fuck? Why? Oh, because those are colliders. I see. Okay, so in this case, my nav mesh agents would always go down, like around, and then down, and then back over to the goal. But with these nav mesh links, like these jump connectors, what are they called? Make sure I get it right. Off mesh links, generated off mesh links, I guess is what they're called. The system automatically, runs along the edges of nav meshes and says, oh, if this is within the threshold we've set of falling and the threshold we've set of distance, then like you're allowed to fall down to this position. And that lets my AI like take the fastest route instead of the most island route. And I just went through all the arenas and generated those, and it was super quick. Okay. So now we're into, now my list, I've run out of list, and I have to start going through my like source tree commits. Basically, I didn't give myself enough time to prepare for this. So I got to 5 o'clock and I was like, oh, my list, I have a lot more stuff to go over. Oh, this is kind of a fun bug. I can show this one. So in January, I realized that it would be more fun to be a floppy sausage neck animal if you could kind of push objects around. Let me do where am I? Arena mode select. Okay. Yeah, it would be more fun to be a floppy sports animal if you could, if the physics felt more realistic, and instead of just bouncing or slipping off of everything, you actually had some friction with things in the environment. Shit. Should be an arena globe there. That's the thing I want to show you, but aquarium. Okay, should work now. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you could have friction with things so that you could rotate that kind of round globe-looking thing. Like it looks like something I could rotate. What? I can't right now? That's annoying. Shit. Chromatic. Huh. I must have applied the aquarium version of it. Anyway, I tried to do this when I first set up the globe and I couldn't do it. And it sent me on a rabbit hole of discovering why and fixing it. And so I realized that the player butt needed to have friction so that I wouldn't stick onto walls when I tried to walk into a wall. But the player body, like the neck and the head, were free to have friction because those don't control the like where the body could go. And even if the face had like friction with the wall and was like sticking to it, the butt was still gonna fall, and because the head was constrained to follow the butt, then it would be fine. But when I turned on this friction, I started with it too high, and I got a lot of funny bugs from Bryce. I'll show you one of them. Gym, side room, okay. Where the player's face would kind of get stuck on a wall and then like roll and twist into itself, and like your head would roll down the wall, and it just looked very bad, and like your critter was not enjoying it. So let's do player body. So that was 0.15. I don't remember, so I don't do it again. Yeah, so you'd get stuff like this where your face would like roll into the wall and you could twist it. Oof, and oh, look at that. Sick. So sick. And Bryce kept uploading these videos of this happening to Trello, this kind of thing, till I eventually decided it was too messed up. Oh man, yuck. Yeah, it's not what you want. You don't want that. Too much friction. Yeah, the body horror. So it's okay to get some of that, like your face rubs along the wall and your head will turn a little bit or whatever, but you don't want that like twist. I mean, it was even worse than that at some point. Yeah, here we go. Instead of multiply, let's do average. Ugh. Maybe maximum. Ooh, look at that. So sick. Okay. So we can undo that now. So my as you can see, my fix to that was just to turn down the friction a lot and to switch to the multiply combine option rather than add, or sorry, rather than max or average or neck. Yeah. Whoop. Whoop. Okay. A minor bug during team select. I guess I can show this. I don't really show the menus too often. On team select, there are these cursors that you use to drag around your tokens to choose what team you're going to be on. And let's do quick play. None of this really matters. Player select has them too, but I'm more interested in this other part. Team. Yeah, so on this screen you've got your cursor, and then there's these tokens or pogs, and when you switch teams you go between, or sorry, your cursor's text changes color to match what team you are, so even if your cursor's not near your pog, you know what team you're on. And if I change to no team, there was a bug where your color wasn't changing, so it was staying white, so it just like looked kind of weird. Anyway, super minor bug. This one's less of a bug and more of a feature request. Bryce suggested that some of the quests specify a preferred game mode to play, just because some of the theming and the writing in the quests kind of make certain game modes more of a good fit than others. In one of the quests, I think it's called Fury Worry, one of the characters has a rage problem and another one is like nervous and worried about it, so you go to help them confront the like rage problem person, and then of course the person with a rage problem is angry that you would even say that, and then they fight you, and because it's kind of an angry fighting moment, it makes sense that you would play sumo, which is like the most angry fighting of the games. And so I added a feature to specify for quests like this quest type or this game mode should be more likely to be played during that quest. That's new. Materials back. Oh, there's a bug where Bryce and I, for some reason, have different. I don't even know how to explain it. Like in the overworld, there's a few materials that when I commit them to version control, when Bryce opens a project, they're always the bright pink, like missing material, and the game object says the material is missing. But if they commit, if they repair it and then commit it, when I download it, it's missing. Still don't know what's up with that, but we went back and forth a few times to try to fix that. This one's kind of a weird one, but if you are making a physics game and struggling to optimize it, then it's interesting to know about, or interesting to talk about. You might already know about it too. Physics. So a physics layer, assuming you're somewhat familiar with Unity, the different layers can be used to define which objects collide with which other objects, and you can optimize your game a lot by like selectively allowing layers to collide or not collide. For example, the player bodies and sausage are made up of let's say, I don't know, like 15 rigid bodies or something like that. 15 rigid bodies, and so when there are 8 players on screen, that's 120 rigid bodies. That's not quite right. It's probably more like 10 rigid bodies per character, so it's 80 dynamic rigid bodies if there are 8 characters on screen. And in the world there might be, let's say 20 triggers that are all detecting players, and if all of the player piece rigid bodies are on the same layer and set to be detected by, you know, the 20 things that sense players, that's a lot of comparisons or whatever, a lot of overlap checks. But if we know that it's not super important that the tip of my head activates this this trigger, then we only need to know, like, generally, like, is the player's butt, let's say, like, is the most important collider for determining the player's motion in our thing, which is the butt in this case, which is just the capsule that's like the base of the player, is that in our thing. So we can set the player's butt on a certain layer, which I call player physics, and then all of their body can be on the player body level. Then we can tell all of our triggers, like, only look for, like, only collide with, only do trigger overlap checks with the player physics layer, because that's all we care about. Then, instead of 80 versus 20 triggers, you've only got 8 versus 20, which is a lot better. And if you go into the code part of it, when you do the player physics sensor, this is just a trigger volume that maintains a list of any players that have entered it. When we enter the trigger, whatever thing this is, we're going to run this piece of logic. We're going to check if a rigid body is null. We're going to see if this is a thing we've sensed before. If it's not, then we're going to look through all the children and try to get a component, and then add it. And then we're going to do another null check, and then we're going to check our list to see if it contains this thing. And so this isn't like a crazy expensive function or anything, but there's definitely like a few operations here that we would prefer to not do often if possible. And rather than having 80 objects triggering these on 20 triggers very often, instead we could have it only happen 8 times, and like this one is always going to give us something if only the player physics layer, if the only things on the player physics layer are actually the butt of the player that holds the player physics. So it's a lot cheaper. So that's one example of optimizing physics using layers, and how that affects, you know, how many on trigger enter callbacks you get, and how that in turn optimizes your code, because you run the code less times if your layers are better optimized. And that's something. And that so getting back to the point, this week I went through all the players and made sure all of their body parts, like everything but the butt, was on the player body layer, and the butt was on the player physics layer. Next thing, this wasn't really a bug fix, but I tweaked the image effects across the game. If I turn this off, you can see that I do some color grading. There's a vignette. There's bloom, which is kind of hard to see from this screenshot, I guess. There's, I think that's it. There's also, I don't have them enabled right now. There's also anti-aliasing as an option, which makes everything look a bit nicer. It looks better when it's full screen, like it's more noticeable. And then ambient occlusion, which not super noticeable right now. Mostly because my baked light maps are low resolution, so there's already kind of like a blurry shadow thing going on. Anyway, I went through and tweaked all of these, like increased the contrast on the color grading, increased the saturation a bit, and I also changed on switch, instead of disabling all image effects, I changed it to only disable anti-aliasing and ambient occlusion, because anti-aliasing is an expensive shader operation, and ambient occlusion requires the camera to render the depth normal as a depth normal pass, which renders everything in the scene again using a specific shader, which is like not an expensive shader, but it still requires rendering everything in the scene again, which is like not something we really have time for, especially on Switch. So those two are disabled on Switch. And this is I'm still at a testing phase of like whether I'll actually be able to have the other image effects on Switch, but I think it's likely, because bloom and color grading and vignette are all just, vignette might even, I'm not sure how this is applied, but that could literally just be like a sprite over the screen. Not really sure what the deal is there, but bloom and color grading are just like, given this pixel, if it's brighter than a threshold, you know, brightening even more, and color grading is just, I'm not actually sure how they're applying it. It might just be like a math function that's generated by this, or maybe the usual way you do color grading is you take what's called a lookup texture, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but you basically take this little image, put it in Photoshop, like tweak sliders and stuff until the screen looks how you want it to look, and then take that image, which you've also tweaked using all the same tweaks that you tweak the main image in Photoshop, and then you take that and feed that as the lookup texture, and then in runtime, for every pixel across the screen, you use that lookup texture to get what your texture or what your pixel color becomes. I'm not sure if that's what's happening with this color grading here, but that's like a cheap operation. It's just a texture lookup. So that's another thing I worked on. Yeah, there's a bit of bloom. Image effect performance on Switch isn't really that bad. Like that's not where I'm having trouble. I think the biggest killer for me is doing that depth normal pass, because it, like I said, it renders everything again. So it goes over every object in the scene again, and it's too much. It's funny at low frame rate, like it doesn't add, and this makes sense because it's, you know, there's an amount of milliseconds that get added for each operation, and that one, when you're running at a low frame rate, adding even more milliseconds like has less of an effect than when you're running at a high frame rate. But if I was locked to 30 instead of aiming for 60 when I can get it, then ambient occlusion might be possible in some cases, but now it's not. Let me go back. I would say generally I don't have enough expertise about like render performance specifically. Like that's not, I don't have expertise in that area just yet, so I wouldn't want to try to speak outside my understanding. Okay, let's keep going. So we got a lot of stuff to get through. Okay, so I already described how the triggers work, how kinematic trigger, how convex mesh triggers are better than a bunch of primitives assembled to an approximate shape. Another example of using that is what layer is that on? Layer, sensor layer. Okay, so another example of using this is each biome in the overworld has a, well, let me explain first. The hub in, well, let me start over again. The overworld has a theme. There's a music track that's the theme of the overworld. And for each of these biomes, which is kind of a different thematic section, this, you know, desert, beach, jungle, and Hollywood, these each kind of have a different feel to just like the like hub area. So when we go to each of these, we want to change the hub theme. It's still the same song, but we change elements. Like in the desert, there's like a nice whistle and like a twangy guitar. Or in the jungle, there's like marimba drums. And basically there's changes. And when we enter one of those biomes, we want to change to match that that theme. We want to blend our song into that new version of the song. So that's what these triggers are. And the reason that these are, the reason this came up is previously I was doing this as there was an entrance trigger here that when you entered the trigger, it would become, you know, it would transition to whatever this is, and then if you hit the enter trigger back into the hub, it would go back to the main theme. The issue arose when you would go into the junkyard, go to the entrance, the junkyard entrance thing, go play a match in the junkyard, and then come back to the overworld. When you did that, you would, you know, you'd spawn here, you would never enter this enter zone, or this enter trigger, and so the music would stay as the hub theme, and it would sound weird, and that's not really what I wanted. So two solutions to that. One is add another trigger to the scene that is just like right here, and do that for every case where this is possible. So in the hub, add a zone for where you spawn, add a zone for each of the entrances back into the hub from the biomes, also add triggers for the gym and the hat shop, which you can enter, and then in each of the biomes, do one where you enter the biome and for where you you know, come back from being in the arena. And so that ends up being 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 triggers instead of, you know, we've got 5. That's less collisions to resolve against overall. And because these are convex triggers, it's like pretty cheap, and we don't have to worry about any kind of special case of, let's say I wanted to add another way to enter some secret room, like to a cave or something in the beach. I'm not going to do that, but should that need arise, I don't have to worry about like remembering that I need to add this extra trigger. It's just like, this is covered, like this biome is where that music will play. So that's the idea there. Yeah. Notice you have all the hats in the scene below the environment, so you can easily load them. These actually aren't, all this stuff here aren't loaded into the build. It's just a workflow thing for me. Back when I was working on hats a lot, and I wanted to see that all of them are lit correctly and like sized correctly, and I'm trying to remember like the different things I would do with them. Just like when I was working on the hats, it was useful to have all of them in front of me at once for various reasons. Same with the players. And I could, you know, if I want to work on the turbine, I could, you know, type into my thing turbine and drag it into the scene, edit it, and then delete it. Like make sure I remember to delete it before hitting play or making a build or whatever. But as a workflow thing, I instead keep what's called a workbench in my scene, which is just a game object which is marked with the tag editor only so that it's deleted when you make a build, and has a script on it that deletes this game object, including everything under it, on awake before anything else, before any other script runs. And that's just a workflow thing for me that I learned from the Battleship Brigade guys. I don't have to worry about it being in the build. I don't have to worry about making sure I delete every little thing that I've added to mess with before the game starts. It's just easier. And that's why this is in here. Okay, let's keep going. So there's some bugs in here about making sure that music properly stops when I exit the overworld. There's also one where the first time I made these triggers, there were some issues with, like, the Hollywood one, for example. I made it extend a little bit into the hub, and so you could technically enter that from the hub before Hollywood was unlocked. So if you go rub your face on that wall, you could start the Hollywood music, and that was a little bit weird. Nice, Angel Rubiov. Glad to hear that. Okay, so that's that. Oh, cool. This one is one I'm really proud of, and thankful for having Bryce's QA on. For the longest time in the game, this is one of the most long-standing bugs, I would say. Probably for a year, or maybe like 8 months, this has been an existing bug. But when you keep music on, when you would, how do I contextualize this? When you have a character who runs, based on their speed, you want their animation speed to change so that their walk speed, so that their animation speed matches their movement speed. For the longest time in the game, if you were to just barely move the stick, just teeny tiny bit, your character would not animate, and they would just kind of slide along the ground. And this was, as I understood, it was an issue with, I thought it was an issue with the animator, where the transition threshold between I need to show the animator to explain this properly. So here, this is a transition between two animations in the animator. And to do this, you set different conditions, and you can say, if move speed, which is a parameter that I've set, is less than some arbitrary float, and is turning as false, whatever, go to the idle state. Previously, I thought that, oh, this threshold is finicky because what I was passing in was the actual velocity of the rigid body, the magnitude of that velocity along the X and Z axes. And I was just oh, this is too finicky, this number is too small and changes too fast, so it's not really right. And if I make it higher, then the blend into idle isn't gonna look right. And anyway, I just had a misconception of how this should work, and it looked bad. And the thing where if you were moving very slowly, your dude wouldn't animate, it was just super terrible. But Bryce called this out, and I was kind of yeah, I know this sucks. I don't know if I can fix it. Here's 2 options of ways to fix it. And Bryce chose the harder one that I didn't want to do, or Bryce suggested the harder one that I didn't want to do. And so then I went in and actually was okay, I'm gonna try to do this. I think it'll make it look a little bit better. My solution was to just rewrite it, basically. I'm trying to remember physics state. Okay. So like I said, previously it was the speed of this animation was based on literally your velocity, you know, your rigid body velocity, and that's like a finicky number. And I was just taking the real thing, not doing any like clamping or like stretching it over a range. And so it's hard to explain this problem just because it's like little finicky math, I guess. But the solution now is we get the magnitude of our input, which is just our left stick. If it's 0, you know, that's, if the magnitude is 0, it's just 0. If we say our player doesn't have control of our bottom, which means we're frozen to listen to dialogue, or we're frozen at the start of a match as we wait for the match to start, then it's, you know, 0, just set it to 0. Otherwise, if we're bigger than a really small number, then, and this is basically like if it's not 0, then clamp it to a range that we've defined, which basically allows me to say if this number is like too finicky, like too close to 0, where we're gonna get like a weird back and forth blend between idle and the like walk animation, then like pull it up so that we get the minimum walking speed, basically. So we do that, and then we do this curve because the speed of the run animation isn't linear, but that's not really important. So we pass this along. Now if we go to now that we know our number, our move speed number is never going to be like between 0.0001 and like 0.05 or something. Now that we know it's not going to be like super tiny small and like finicky, what we can do is have our transition here from movement to idle be a fixed rate. So if we know it's never going to go like this, it's never going to be like super small and like switching back and forth really quickly. It's either like the player's attempting to do movement or they're not. Then we can force a fixed duration transition back to 0. So I'm running and I let go, and the player like starts that fixed duration transition back to feet on the ground, just idling. That's the thing I couldn't figure out how to do before. And it looks way better. And this works at any speed, which is the thing I'm most happy about. Go back to the animator. And it's the same the other way. Yeah. Okay. So that's that. I think my main takeaway from that bug was if you're stuck on a problem and it seems like none of the information you have, or like the variables you think you have access to, can be used to solve the problem, maybe try to think outside the box and see like, is there another variable I have access to that will give me a better answer, or is the thing I'm trying to show here, this animation in my case, am I using the right information to try to show the thing? Like, because in my case, what I was using was actual rigid body velocity, which isn't really like the thing I want to use, because if my player like the intent is the thing that is important to show about like player movement animation. It's not, you're not trying to reflect actual realism, like actual real locomotion. You're trying to like give player the proper feedback to what they're trying to do. Previously, this thing I'm doing here where I'm like running to the back of this bench, that would just give me like the player wouldn't move at all. Their character would just kind of like that, they would physically move, but the character wouldn't animate, and that's not what you want. You want to show the player that their intent is being expressed, like their intent is used. Is this fence floating? It is floating. Interesting. I should fix that. Okay. Anyway, I think you get the point. Like consider the problem you're trying to solve. Is that actually the problem? And are you using the right tools to solve it? Okay, so now here's a collision bug. There were a few of these that came up this week. Let's jump over to the junkyard. Swoop. So, I don't know why, but all of these things, all these trophies like look super wrong right now. All the reflection probes are off. Huh. That's interesting. I will have to fix that. Anyway, the collision bug we've got here, and I'll do arena mode select so I can just like show an example. The first one we got here was that AI were getting stuck on several parts of this level. I can show you the parts. So the first one was right here, this like part where you walk up this edge out of this little pit. And part 2 was when you're going up the stairs, like just before the top step, you'd get stuck before going over. And if you like before I fixed this, if you looked at the geometry, you would see that the collision geometry was exactly the same as the mesh. And the problem there, the stairs might be more obvious in this case, but in this case, the problem was that the slope of this, when you start, is almost like a straight up wall. You see that? It's like a straight up wall, and then you go down, and you go up again, go down. And an AI could get over this. Like, it's not, like, the locomotion is not unreasonable to get over this, but if you're not, let's say your stick isn't all the way held down or something, like that might not be enough acceleration to bump you over that little ledge. So sometimes AI would be moving diagonally, or maybe they just like weren't super far away, so they weren't pushing their hardest to run to follow the thing, and they would get stuck, and it would look kind of weird, and maybe they would hang there for a second. The other one is the stairs. Obviously stairs are like flat vertical and then flat and then vertical and then flat, so you'd think that AI would just get stuck on every single step. Not really sure why that didn't happen, but they would definitely get stuck on the top step, and I think this middle one was just kind of taller. So my solution to that was pretty obvious, and I feel like this is what everybody does. What? Why is this off? That's not what's supposed to happen. Maybe it's another collision. Okay, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so basically, like, my solution to this was just to remake the geometry of the level to be simpler. Here, it's just like one quad for this whole section instead of like actually modeling in all the little divots and stuff. And then for the stairs, it's just like, turn that shit into a ramp. I did, yeah, Mari, you got it. I just made it a ramp. And I think that's what everybody does for this kind of situation, because it makes sense. I probably should change it to not be so weird. Although it's not really noticeable, so I guess I won't change it. When you look at it this close, it looks really weird that I would start with the vert of this ramp at the bottom of the bottom step and then end it at the top of the top step instead of ending it at the bottom of the top step, or like a little back or something. I don't know. I might change it. It's kind of bugging me. But that's that. And I did a similar thing in the overworld for the hub. Certainly you can see that there's like this little sidewalk piece there and there and there and over here, and all of those were like noticeable. If I was walking, it's just like a noticeable thing when I hit that. It feels bad. Hub. Yeah, so I just like took out those chunks. And then in Hollywood, same deal for this sidewalk piece. Felt bad to hit those edges, so I just smoothed it out. Yep. In general, also, like, rather than using the actual mesh that you're rendering with, for collision is like not a great idea, because it's usually really high poly. In the case of my overworld, it's like I'm not using that many polygons, but if you compare just like this stuff that's highlighted as light green here versus the entire Sportsville mesh thing here, like all of this stuff highlighted in orange includes the like lot over here and the background up here. It's just like, I don't know how many polygons, maybe like 500 polygons of extra stuff that you just don't need to be testing collision against. It's like, why bother? Similarly, and even more, there's even more faces over here. In the desert, I just cut off everything that you don't have access to as a player, and that's like, you know, another 1,000 faces that I don't need to be colliding against. So I'll come back to this, but I had to do the same thing for this rock wall. Whereas before, the rock wall, like the entire rock wall was the collision, and this rock wall, I think it's like 15,000 polygons or something crazy, because it's the way it was made is I placed a bunch of rocks, just like placed them to the shape of the rock wall that I wanted. Like I made a simple model of a wall. It was like, okay, this is like an interesting shape as a wall, and then I just like stuck rocks into it for like 4 hours or something, and then went through and just deleted as many faces as I could stand, basically, so I could stand and delete, while making sure that there are no holes to see through it. But having a mesh collider with 15,000 faces on it, 15,000 triangles on it is like not great. Not great for performance. So I went through and I used the merge tool in Maya, which lets you take any verts that are within some threshold you set and just combine those. And just by doing that, I took it down to like 6,000 or 7,000, I think, something like that. And then, and it's still like almost entirely feels exactly the same. Like you can see that the collision here is like pretty close. I wonder if this is a hole I can get through. Right there. Oh no, maybe not. There's a. Yeah. Anyway, and then I just started deleting aggressively, like anywhere on this rock wall that you couldn't touch as a player. If you look at, and I could do more of this, but if you look at the collision, I mentioned this earlier. Not occluder. detail. So this is the actual like really aggressive, don't let the player get out of the map or on top of things they're not supposed to be on collider. And you can see that within this there's a bunch of can I select both of these at once? Rockwall 2. Yeah, you can see that there's still, I could still delete a lot of those faces. But anyway, it's down to like 2,500 polygons in that thing, so it's not as bad anymore. Go back to collider. Okay. So back to my list. Rebakes nav mesh. Soccer goal. And there's a lot. There's so many stupid things that I've done that I can tell you about after this week. Maybe turn off some of this stuff. Camera zones. Oh, player sensors. I don't need that. And where are we at? Aquarium. So the soccer goals in the aquarium were a problem because previously I hadn't cut out. I have to explain a little bit for this to make sense. So a nav mesh in Unity obviously is like a surface along which AI can travel. It's not necessarily obvious. And using the component nav mesh obstacle, this is kind of legacy nav mesh stuff. There's a new version now if you use Unity. But anyway, using a nav mesh obstacle, you can cut out a chunk of a nav mesh that's been generated, and you can, at runtime, you can move these around and have them be updated so that your hole is like correct even if you're moving your object. And for sausage, I've used this in several really hacky ways. One of which is this section in the water gets cut out by a dynamic system at runtime that basically from either side of this platform shoots a ray to the wall on either side, and then spaces what I call a gap carver, but spaces out a box, the box of the obstacle, of the nav mesh obstacle, so that that entire section that's on the water is just like cut out from the nav mesh. And I can play this just so you can see it. I don't recommend doing this, by the way. It's stupid. It's not inefficient, but it's stupid. I think the new nav mesh stuff is the way to go. Okay, so navigation. Yeah, so you can see it's a little bit jittery, but it's fine. Yeah, here we go. Haha. So yeah, there's a box here, you can see it. It's like changing size every frame to cut that part out. And the reason I did this is because I knew I wanted this moving platform to have a nav mesh on it, but there's no way to add stuff to a nav mesh, or at least there wasn't when I was writing this. I think there is now with the new changes to the nav mesh, but I knew I needed this piece to stay on the nav mesh, so what I did is I baked this entire section of water onto the nav mesh, and then I used the gap carver to just cover up the parts that we don't want to have at runtime. And then so the getting back to the bug, I don't know why I gave you all this background on the gap carver system, but basically if a ball would get behind the goal, the player's first thought would be, I'm gonna run straight at it until I'm in the goal, and then up until I change the shape of these nav mesh obstacles to actually reflect the kind of U shape of the goal. It was just a box. Let me tweak that. X, yeah, here we go. Okay, yeah, so the player would run into the goal, and then for whatever reason the ball would end up behind this thing, and then because the player was in the goal, which isn't on the nav mesh, they would use my like backup navigation stuff, like backup movement stuff, which just says like go straight towards the thing, which means because the ball's behind it, which means they would just stay in the goal and run into the back of the goal, which, you know, isn't what you want. Looks really stupid, feels like a bug. And that was the bug I had to fix by actually like arranging this to look like the goal. So that makes that not happen anymore. That was a long explanation of that. Next one. In the gym, there's a target game that's part of the tutorial where a scout tells you like how to do a stomp, and why did I spawn a bunch of bots? So yeah, he tells you to stomp a button, and then you have to use your kick to knock this around. There's no way to do it except a kick. So you kick it, you hit a target, whatever, and the targets are they're a little they're running on a coroutine so that they respawn after some amount of time. Once you've like finished the game, pretty sure they respawn. Yeah. And this bug had come up a couple times where if you quit the tutorial in the middle, basically after you had broken one of the two targets, then you would get a null ref after some amount of time. And this null ref was because of a stupid thing I did. And this is kind of a stupid thing I do a lot, where instead of starting a coroutine on this object, you know, in the standard way you do, start coroutine, hit, and respawn. So this creates a coroutine and registers it with this object, like this mono behavior, the one that you're calling this start coroutine from. And so whenever you disable this game object, or disable this mono behavior, or set this game object false, or set a parent of this game object false, all of the coroutines on this object, running on this object, get disabled or get stopped, whatever. But if you do this stupid thing where you call some other object and start the coroutine on that, then this coroutine will keep running even if this game object gets turned off. And so in this case, what happens is the game manager, which is, in my case, is a singleton that exists from when you first load the game all the way through the lifetime of the app. Never gets disabled, never gets turned off, never gets respawned or anything. So if you start this coroutine on the game manager, if you don't manually stop it, this coroutine is only going to end of its own accord. Which means if I start this and then go to another scene, this coroutine is going to keep running. And if in this function I reference something on this game object, then we're going to get a null ref because that game object's been deleted because we're in a new scene. And this is it's not common, but it's like I would say it's an uncommon but not rare bug that I get because I'm stupid and start coroutines on other things. And why do I do that? In this case, it's because I only want to have one script for these two targets, I think is the reason. Is that why? Hit and respawn. Or no, sorry, I don't want to have, yeah, I only want to have one script for these targets, uh, but each of the targets has this script on it, right? No, okay, the reason I do this is because I'm really lazy, and instead of writing, instead of having like a manager for these two targets, I just want to write the one script and have them kind of manage each other's state. Really, it's just bad programming. So both of these targets have the same script. If either one of them gets hit, they start a coroutine it's basically like, I'm going to turn myself off. My coroutine is going to keep running because I spawned it on the game manager. We're going to wait until the other one has been hit, and then we're going to wait a few seconds, then we're going to respawn both of us. This is bad for multiple reasons, but the one to focus on here, I guess, is this one, because this is why it bit me. Yeah. Now I'm gonna think about this all day, how bad that that target thing is. Okay. Did that. I don't want to get too much into the flag stuff because a lot of it is like really specific inner workings of how that mechanic works. But there has been a long-standing bug that goes away for a little bit and then comes back and then goes away for a little bit and then comes back, where flags in capture the flag mode will fall through the ground, and this, at different times, this has happened on every arena, and it's super annoying. And it wasn't until this week that I actually went through, read all of the code of the flag stuff, thought about how to fix it, and actually did it. And because I'm saying this, I'm sure that a flag is going to fall through the ground. That'd be so funny. Yeah, that works. The gist of this is that the gist of the bug, I should say, is that I was doing kind of a complex set of changes to the flag, when I should have just like done a much simpler version of the flag. What was changing at runtime is when the flag is on the ground and like ready to be picked up, it becomes a trigger and it goes onto a layer that the player can touch, and becomes kinematic so that it can't move. Those are the three major things. And then when the player picks it up, the collider turns off and it is still kinematic, and it becomes on a layer that ignores other players, just because. And then if the player gets knocked down, this is the weird part, the flag needs to become a physics object, set itself straight so that it can't like tumble sideways, because if like these flags are rigid and they can't really do that. And then it needs to fall to the ground, wait till it's grounded, and then set itself kinematic and like be ready to be picked up again. So that was kind of a complex like series of states. And the bug where it would fall through the ground would come up when I didn't correctly change the state, or the layer that the flag got changed to was one that the moving platforms in the aquarium didn't account for, so it would fall through those, or or maybe I like didn't set the trigger in all cases, and so it would, or I didn't set it back from being a trigger so that it would fall through the ground as a trigger. Basically, I just needed to make sure the like changes from state A to state B and state B to state C and state C to state A were like solid. That's not, there's no any interesting lesson. Yeah, Maury, it's not a good way to handle targets. I don't recommend it. I think probably when I wrote it, I was like trying to hack the tutorial of the game together really fast because I want, like, when I was doing that, I was trying to ship the game so much sooner. Like this was probably back in October, and I wanted to ship in November. So I was just like in total crunch hack mode, and it was bad. But I should probably go back and rewrite the targets. Yeah, there's not I don't have a specific lesson from the target or from the flag thing, except just like keep your logic as simple as possible, and if something is causing you problems for a long time and they're like bugs that keep creeping up over time, it's likely that you need to just go back and rewrite that, like read it and like understand it and then rewrite it, because you'll probably be able to delete a lot of code and just do it in a simpler way. Yeah, I've got more stuff about the flags, but I don't really want to get into that. This one's interesting. So players, if they fall out of a map or they get killed by spikes or something, let me start a game so you can see this. They poof into a poof of smoke and then turn into like a little glowing color ball and then fly up to a spawn point, and then your player respawns in a bubble. So like this. What the fuck? Or I broke it? How is that possible? That's funny. It's really weird that I didn't come across that sooner, I guess. Okay, so yeah, so you die, you come back as this like color thing, and then it flies you up, you turn into a bubble, and then your character can fly around a bit and be safe until you're ready to respawn. And when you respawn, there's like, you'll see there's an animation of the bubble kind of scaling up, and then your player scales up, so they're not immediately like fully in the bubble. It kind of, yeah, happens quick, but you can see what I'm talking about. The weird part of this comes from when your player dies. Like if I die and respawn, what's happening is the player's getting set inactive and then needs to be respawned. But there's no like actual instantiation of a new instance of the player. I'm just like turning your player off and then resetting them back to where they are, or back to where they should be in the bubble. That's interesting. And this is weird because the player's neck is like this floppy. Looks like it is busted. Yeah, so I turn my player off and then I turn them back on when they get up in the air, and the idea is that you want them to like fully be set up again so that their joints work correctly and your head flops correctly and that nothing's broken in this kind of complicated setup of your neck, you know, of the 10 physics joints or whatever. Let's do Yeah, I don't want to get too much into this part, but it's your head's like this floppy joint thing. And previously, up until now, because I didn't have a solid understanding of how physics joints work, especially during the like enable disable kind of phase of game object life, I was doing this complex thing where when your player would respawn, I would start a coroutine, like delete all of the joints and rigid bodies from your neck, place your neck in the right position, add back joints and rigid bodies, and like reconnect them in the same way that I do when you start, like when your players first spawn. And it worked, but there was this noticeable like pop when you start, like when you first respawn, where your player would like, for one frame, they would like be stretched way out, and then they would be scaled down to 0 and then scale back up. And it just looked kind of weird and didn't feel right, and I didn't like it. So recently I learned that when you turn a game object off and turn it back on, whatever position those joints are in at that enable, and before you get the enable call, so like think of like a pre-on enable, all of your fixed joints or character joints or whatever are gonna like set up right then. And that's like, you can't control that. The only thing you can do is before your game object gets set active, or better yet, when your game object gets disabled, is, you know, reset your player to the position they're supposed to be when joints are set up. So that's what I had to do. Yeah. Hey, welcome, Stibunsen. Thanks for coming by. Yeah. Yeah, Maury, it's a way. So that's the lesson from the bug with player spawning or whatever, is if you're messing with joints, make sure that if you need to, like, let's say you're recycling players like I am, or you're recycling something with joints in it, before you set them active, you need to make sure they're in the correct position for the joints to be like initialized, because joints do get reinitialized in on enable, but before you can do an on enable. That's the point there. Okay, here's an interesting one. There's still like 10 more items in my list, in my commits. Probably not all of those will be bugs. Okay, so in the overworld, as opposed to the arenas, there are all of these different camera areas where the camera can face different directions and is dependent on where the player is. And there's a lot more weird geometry that the camera has potential to intersect with. And when I built the game, up until like a year and 6 months into making the game, there was no overworld. There was no situation in which the camera would need to resolve against collision with walls or worry about intersecting with anything. It was always just third person over, out behind the game, and you're watching from above. And that's like, there's nothing there to intersect with. Once I added this part of the game, the overworld, it became very obvious that this was becoming like a real third-person, free-flowing kind of camera game, where this was going to be an issue of like, intersections are going to be an issue. So that's a good case I haven't fixed yet. Yeah, the camera can just get in stuff. And it looks really bad, feels unfinished, whatever. And rather than actually writing a code solution where I'm like doing whiskers and like pushing the camera away from walls and stuff, I didn't want to spend more time on that because it's not like the player that isn't in full control of the camera. So I as a designer kind of have control over where the camera is in most situations, and so it's it's like 90% as good a solution for me to just like handle the few special cases as it would be for me to do this like complicated to write complicated camera code to actually like resolve properly all these situations. It's just like not worth the time to do it. So my solution is to make the camera just collide with stuff, just to put a rigid body on it and make it collide. And because, you know, if the camera could collide with everything, it would run into tons of walls all the time and get stuck on like this is a good example of where if you look at the level collision, this rock, like this is kind of the front of a, think of like a capsule would be right here, and if the camera ran into this wall here, it would resolve to the right and go around to the other side of this to this fork. Like it would resolve to go around that to that side, and that's not what you want. You want it to just go over and like fix itself. So rather than have the camera resolve with everything in the scene, I just, in any example of a special case where the camera might intersect badly with a wall in a way that looks really unprofessional and like buggy and like the game is unfinished, I just put a what I call a camera blocker on a specific layer that's just made for this kind of thing where I want to keep the camera out of the wall. And those camera blockers, that's the layer, don't collide with the player, don't collide with any dynamics, it's just for the camera. So let's look at another example of this. Here's a good spot. Boom, we don't want to intersect with that wall. And over here is another good spot. Whoop. See, that felt super jank still, but I would argue that even this like very jank rare situation, like even though it's reproducible, it still feels like, man, that's not ideal, but it's not game breaking, and it's not bad enough where somebody's gonna feel the need to like criticize the game or whatever. Like it's clear that I'm handling the situation even if it's not the ideal, even if it feels jank. Whereas if my camera like went into this thing and it felt, you know, that would feel like broken, like the game's not done. Yeah. And so I guess I'll show you like what a camera blocker looks like in this situation. Let's do gizmos. No, we'll do scene. Didn't I enable a camera blocker? Oh, I gotta be in not play mode. Here we go. I'll turn off camera zones because it's not really relevant anymore. Okay. So here's what this looks like. It's just, this was made with Pro Builder. I just like very simple, very approximately modeled this like shape here. Tried to keep it rounded, especially along the top, so that the camera wouldn't get stuck on any hard edges. I could move these rocks apart more so that kind of stuck in the fork problem doesn't happen as often. Here's the bigger wall. This one's even simpler. It's very low poly, very simple. Doesn't take much time at all. And there's the jungle wall. So easy. There's another one. So even if there end up being like 30 of these places where I have to do this, that might be like maybe like 2 or 3 hours of work, whereas writing writing code for the camera to work in all situations and have it work perfectly is there. It's a lot more error prone, and it it needs to work in all situations instead of like being, I can't hard code into the camera like make sure it works in this situation, make sure it works in this situation. It has to just work everywhere, or that's it's potentially much harder to do that than the 3 hours or whatever it took that it will take to set up all of these zones. Here's another one where if your character's on this platform and then runs and walks off and then like backs up into this corner, I don't want the camera to get inside this rock and be looking down at you. That's not what you want, so it bumps over the edge. So this has been a good solution. I do have a no friction physical material on the camera blockers, yes. It's not actually on the blockers. I guess I should phrase that as there's a no friction physical material on the camera, which is set to use minimum rather than average, so that no matter what the camera hits, it's always going to have no friction and not bounce. But yes, good call though. Okay, that's I think that's enough about the camera blocker stuff. Let's go to the next thing. Something else I learned this week, but I think is likely that I knew before, is that when you have joints of any kind, they automatically start with this checkbox, enable preprocessing checked, and this parameter helps stabilize impossible to fulfill configurations. If you look at the docs, that means they suggest, what that means is stacks. It helps resolve stacks of stuff. So like something like this, but with like 1,000. I'm gonna keep doing this. I'm even gonna hit play with it. It's totally gonna fall over because the ground's not even right here. It'll be fun to watch though. Wait. So basically the point of me doing this, let me put a rigid body on these, is that this checkbox being on all fixed joints is really weird, because it makes one of the most common uses of fixed joints and configurable joints, which is like ragdolls or like floppy things, makes those not work well. They kind of fall apart or like get into bad jitter situations. And so I relearned this. I think I knew it before because in code my characters were set to not use preprocessing, so I must have known that at some point. But I went through and like made sure that was off for all joints, including these cacti. Wow, that's so satisfying. That's awesome. Not sure why I've never done this before. They're so heavy. Anyway, this is super unrelated from what I'm doing. Okay, let's get rid of that. So that's the joint thing. Yeah, there's a few of those. Oh, something I noticed about shadows, and this might be obvious to everybody that's not me, but if you, the more you increase your shadow distance, especially when you're using no shadow cascades, the worse your shadows look when you're close up to something. So if I look at this, so you can see the shadows here look kind of bad, but if you actually zoom out to like the game distance, which is like here, they look pretty good. But if I go to quality settings and make the shadow distance really far away, see, the farther you get, the shadier these look. Wow, that's so bad. And this is a high resolution. Even if I go to very high, it's still like nothing, no difference. So that's wild. So that's a thing I learned. I did the cutting out the ground colliders like I mentioned before. I simplified the rock wall like I mentioned before. Here's a fun one. So there's a blog post that Unity made, I don't know exactly when, but it was pretty recently, about basically in I can just bring up the article. The article is about placing objects in Unity, and also about if you have a physics game, when you start it, everything will like go to resolve unless you very specifically make sure that everything is in a position where it's like physics settled. And using, or in the newest version of Unity 2018, whatever, there's this new tool, or it's not built in, I should say, but there's a new exposed like part of physics that you can use called simulate, where you can just like simulate physics even if the game's not running. So you could, using the settle physics, you could, for every, you could start this and then keep doing it until every rigid body in the scene has become asleep. And then now all of your, all of your physics objects are like settled in the correct position. When you start the game, they're already asleep and they're already in a position where they start asleep, so they don't need to like settle down, which if your scene is big and has a lot of physics objects like mine, that can be like a noticeable slowdown, especially on a a low spec platform like Switch. So this article was really cool and I was excited to see it, and I took the script to do this and imported it into my project, and then realized that this function, physics simulate, is only usable in 2018, which I'm not on. So then I was depressed for a couple days, and then I was like, you know what, I can just make this myself. I don't need physics simulate. I can just like do it more annoying, more Sausage Sports Club way or something like that. So my steps to do this are, before I start play mode, I use this function, or I use this menu item called cache settlers, which iterates over all objects in the scene that have a certain component on them called physics settler. just there's no properties on it, no exposed properties on it. It's just a component. Internally, there's a settler index, which I use to keep track of different objects during play mode and during edit mode. The first thought you might have is, oh, just use instance ID, which is Unity's like internal way to manage, you know, having a unique instance of an object. But when you're in play mode, like when you hit play and start play mode, not all objects will maintain the instance ID between play time and edit time. So I manually do this by doing cache settlers, which runs over all of those and maps the so it gets an array of all the physics settlers in the scene. It marks their index as, you know, whatever index they are in that array, and then it leaves them. I think that's all it does. Let's look at the menu items. Settler. Cache settlers, yeah, so we go through each one, we set the thing, then we say make sure you save. I don't really need that anymore. And then we hit play and we wait in play mode. The idea is that you wait until everything, all these physics objects, all these physics settlers in your scene have settled. And that means that, you know, if there's a ball in the air, the ball will fall to the ground or roll to a place where it comes to a stop. And then once that's happened, you use physics settler and do save settle transforms. What this does is creates a dictionary of the settler index to a struct which holds position and rotation of whatever object, you know, whatever object you were waiting on to settle. And it saves that to a static dictionary that is on the physics settler tool. So it's saved in the editor, like the because it's because this is a static editor class, the settler tool. Yeah, it's in the editor thing. It's static, which means its data holds over between play mode as long as you don't close the editor. So you can use that to save settle transforms. I only let you do this during play mode, so that and it also checks that all rigid bodies in the scene have been become asleep. So you can't do it if it's not if things haven't settled yet. So you save that, then you can exit play mode and apply save transforms. That once again gets an array of all of the settlers in the scene, iterates over all of them, tries to use that dictionary to look up this object's settler index. If it's if your object has been saved, then we just copy the position and rotation from that struct, and then we're good. So it's like my hacked version of that same system from Unity 2018, but we just use play mode instead of that nice editor tool that they have. So that works. What else we got? And that I guess I should clarify, that's not a bug fix. That's just like kind of an optimization thing. I guess it's a bug fix because you don't want your game to slow down on scene load. That's silly. Another menu item I worked on is set probes and prefabs and scenes. So this is, I should probably move this to Sausage Soccer because it's like a game specific thing, not something everybody wants, but I choose not to use light probes in Sausage because I think it looks really weird when an object like blends to become dark when it enters like a section of the world rather than entering like a shadowed piece of land, if that makes sense. Like in the jungle, for example, the player's not gonna, if I was using light probes, if the player walks under this tree, they're not going to one-to-one be shadowed by this tree. They're gonna like linearly blend to become dark if there's a dark light probe there, and I think it looks weird and is really noticeable as not correct, so I don't like light probes for that reason. But for whatever reason, by default, every object in the game, like if I create a cube, it will start with light probes on. And I should actually do like a test of this to see if this is true or not, but I feel like it makes sense to me that that would be more expensive, like when if it's using a standard shader, or if it's using my toon shader and light probes are affecting it. I would think that light probes being on would be more expensive to render. If it's not, I shouldn't worry about it. But so that's part one of the set probes. That runs through every render in the scene, turns off light probes. If I do it on prefabs, it runs through every prefab in my prefabs folder. You know, does the same thing. I should also probably make that run on the payloads folder, since that has renders under it as well. We'll come back to that. And then part two of that is it does the same thing for reflection probes, but there's another step in this, because I don't want reflection probes to be off, because reflection probes are good. If you don't know what that is, basically you can define a zone like this yellow cube, or rectangular prism, I guess, where this a cube map is generated based on what can be seen from this spot, and we use this cube map to define reflections for anything within that zone. So I turn it off. That's a good example of this. Oh, if you look at the fence post here, you can see, come on, yeah, you can see that the skybox is kind of reflected in the top of that. The trash can's a little less obvious, but if I turn that off, it looks very bad. Instantly looks very bad. So you don't want it to be off, but what I do want to use is simple for most things. Let's go. Yeah, so the options we have for reflection probes are simple, or blend probes, or blend probes and skybox. So simple just uses the one that we are in the range of, which makes sense if the object that you're using is static, if it can't move. Then you don't need to blend probes, because your object won't move, and it won't ever be noticeable that, you know, it hasn't changed to match the reflection. You know, it won't be noticeable that the reflections haven't changed to match the scene around it. So that can be static. But on, let's say, a box, or that's not a good example, on what reflective things do we have that move? I don't know. Imagine that a trash can could roll. If I rolled my trash can from here into the jungle, and suddenly the trash can didn't take on the kind of like green leafiness that you would expect from, you know, a cube map taken in a jungle, like that, all that green, didn't take on that green and blue, then it would look weird. So my tool goes, you know, it goes through each, either in the scene or in prefabs, it goes through each renderer, and if there's a rigid body in the hierarchy of this prefab, or in this, you know, in the children of this object in the scene object, then we set it to be blend probes, and if it doesn't have that, then we set it to be simple. That was such a long explanation of that. Wow. Very good. And then there's also, I tweaked some camera zones, added some collision, and then I started modeling the entrance to the bug museum, like the arena entrance over here. This isn't what it's going to look like as final for sure. There's no roof at all, and the building needs like vines and stuff on it, I'm sure, but we're getting somewhere with it. I actually want to go look at that in game. I haven't done that yet. I'm sure I'll have notes about that. But those are all the bugs I fixed. This has been a long explanation of stuff. Some other stuff I did this week. I mentioned menu items. I talked about menu items a bit. I spent some time actually organizing these into like more obvious, to me at least, like arrangements of stuff, and more properly splitting between general game utilities and Sausage Soccer specific utilities. Some of this stuff is a little bit arbitrary, like the physics settler thing doesn't really matter in context of this game. Nothing in there is specific to Sausage. It's just a general tool. Switch stuff also could not be game specific. Yeah. Another thing I did was, that's like workflow related, is a lot of my shaders in the game were just kind of like arbitrarily thrown into the shaders folder or like into some subfolder. So when I would come in here, every single shader I'd ever written in the game would be under custom, and it wouldn't be organized at all, and it was hard to find stuff. And now I put a lot of them under Sausage, which there's a lot under here now. Foliage, paint. So now it's easier to find stuff. The impetus for this was, I have there's a shader that I use for the player that, for kind of legacy reasons, I don't think I'm using this anymore, but, or no, I am for the indoor mask effect. Basically, I want the player to have its own like shader asset, so that I can specify a stencil for the player to write into, so I can use that for various effects. Right now, it's being used for the indoor mask. So if like the lead player runs into the concert venue, or the moon base, whatever movie set, the mask will show players who are left behind outside where they are, so that they can like figure out how to get to where they're going. And another effect I was interested in using it for before was like decals, where maybe I could put vines or like cracks in the ground, or I don't know, like graffiti or something. Graffiti's arbitrary, but I had worked on this decal system. I might bring it back. I think the beach especially could use some more detailing that decals and like moss kind of stuff would be useful for. But basically, I wanted to stencil the player such that decals would not draw onto the player or other dynamic objects. And because of that, because the player shader wasn't really specified to only be used for the player, I was using it all over the place for lots of props. Noticeably, like these food stuff in here, and like barrels and the director chair and crates and stuff. All that stuff was using the player shader for no reason, and I needed to switch that out. That looks a little better. It still looks kind of bad. Sorry, don't mind me. Yeah, I like that. So getting to the point, these things I'm describing, they're also the player shader on them. When the indoor mask goes on, you can see that those are also masked. Like these barrels will be masked. The hay bales are now masked. The food, if I get it outside, will be masked, which isn't what you want, you know. Yeah, these hay bales look better with a tune shader on them. So that was the impetus for me to go through the shaders and like organize them and put them under proper like headers and stuff. Headers being the in that shader drop down menu, not like C++ headers or something. Other new stuff. I don't know if I mentioned that if I specifically mentioned that I made a new trash can, but this isn't just like a cylinder anymore. And then I'm not gonna play them because that'd be weird, but there's a few developer commentary recordings that I did just to like get into just to like throw myself into it, so I know how much time it's gonna take, how much I need to do like vocal practice or something to not be really awkward. And I think it's just having done 2 of them and just like trying to practice it, I think they're already pretty passable. And if you're interested, you're gonna put up with my like not professional voice actor kind of voice and timbre. So I think it'll be fine. And also my not super professional recording equipment. I just have a snowball mic. But yeah, that's all the stuff. Bunch of stuff this week. I'm a little bummed that Hollywood is still not like fully done yet. I thought I was going to be done a couple weeks ago. I think not last weekend, but the weekend before last weekend, I tweeted on Friday, hoping to be done with the Hollywood biome this weekend, and it's 2 weeks later. But now it's starting to feel within reach. The biggest things are the interiors, which I'm sure are gonna like surprise me with how much work they take to make good. And also the exteriors are like kind of first pass still. Oh, I also didn't go look at the bug museum in game like I was going to. Thanks, man. I'm excited for it. It's gonna be like what's the word? For what's the word for it feels good to like look back on the game, and it's not nostalgic. Bug museum. This feels kind of small. There's gotta be a way to get on top of this. Fuck. Yeah, this looks okay. It feels really small. There's supposed to be windows here. Do. Anyway, that's all I've got for the commentary, or for the for the weekly update. Sorry, I mean to say. I think I want to come back and do a work session, just like working through the rest of the bug museum and doing the whatever the aquarium entrance is going to be, like starting on that. Maybe I'll get through it, but it's hard to say. This looks weird. Why is this seam right here? Postmortem's not the right word. It's like the feeling of doing it. It's like uplifting, and man, there's a word for it. Whoop, I'm gonna Google it. Well, I'm sure I'll remember it at like 2 in the morning tonight. Yeah, cathartic. That's the word. Thanks, Berg. Yeah, it's like a feeling of catharsis to talk about the makings of the game and that stuff. Okay, so that's it for the weekly update. I think I'm gonna come back and do a work session, but I'm gonna take a break for about 30 minutes. Mr. Human Target, welcome. This game is not created 100% solo. I do all the art and all the programming and all the design, but I have a musician friend, Tom Duncan, who has been working with me doing music and sound since pretty early on in the project. I would say within like 4 or 5 months of starting, and then about maybe like 5 months ago, we also brought on Marty Miners, who's doing more sound design, and then I have a friend, Bryce, who's doing QA, like quality assurance, testing the game. But all the programming and art and design is me. Gotta give credit where credit is due. We also have as of this week, we have a trombonist on the team who's literally just doing trombone recordings. I'm really excited to have somebody in the credits as trombonist. Thanks, dude. And it's been like two and a half, a little over 2.5 years now, I think, something like that I've been working on this. A lot of it was part-time. There were 7 months where I was full-time on it, and now I'm part-time again. Do. Ooh. Shit. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna call the weekly update over here. I'll be back in about half an hour to do a work session. Thanks for coming by. If you haven't already, feel free to follow the channel to get a notification when I do more of these. It's usually Sunday afternoon, and then often, not every week, I'll do like a midweek work session in the evening. But yeah, thanks for coming by. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in half an hour when I come back to do a work session. Adios.